The film begins with Captain Brodie Torrance in Singapore, speaking on the phone with his daughter, Daniela. He promises to arrive home in Honolulu in time to spend the holiday with her, showing the deep bond they share. Brodie, a former RAF pilot now working for Trailblazer Airlines, is scheduled to Flight 119, and he heads to meet his co-pilot, Samuel Deal, who updates him on the flight route, mentioning they'll be flying through a potentially dangerous storm. As Brodie prepares for the flight, Bonnie, the chief flight attendant, informs him that he's needed by an RCMP officer on board. Meeting with the officer, Brodie learns that the flight will be transporting an unusual passenger, Louis Gaspard, a former soldier in the French Foreign Legion, now accused of murder. This information unsettles Brodie, but he resolves to proceed with the flight, determined to navigate the challenges ahead and make it home to his daughter. As Flight 119 prepares for takeoff, we catch glimpses of the other passengers on board, including young social media influencers snapping photos and a snooty businessman with a disinterested air. Once in the air, Captain Brodie Torrance and co-pilot Samuel Deal share a quiet conversation, Brodie opening up about his past, mentioning that his wife passed away years ago. As the plane flies over the South China Sea, it enters the path of a severe storm. Heavy turbulence rocks the aircraft, intensifying as they move further into the storm's path. The violent shaking causes Brodie to hit his head on the controls, leaving him momentarily dazed. Amidst the chaos, the RCMP officer, who had unbuckled to check on Louis Gaspard, is flung across the cabin and tragically killed. A flight attendant rushes to assist him, but she too is thrown violently, suffering a fatal injury. Brodie and Dele, struggling to keep control of the plane, realize that they have lost both communication and radar. Working together, they manage to stabilize the aircraft, but the storm has taken its toll, and the plane's damage is severe. Desperately scanning for options, the pilots spot a remote island and prepare for an emergency landing. In a harrowing descent, they bring the plane down in a rough but ultimately successful landing on the island, where passengers and crew brace for what comes next in unfamiliar territory. After the rough landing, Captain Brodie Torrance instructs the shaken passengers to disembark from the plane. He and co-pilot Samuel Deal quickly assess their surroundings and determine they are on Jolo Island in the Philippines, a place known for its dangerous reputation. Meanwhile, in New York City at Trailblazers Airlines headquarters, the board of directors is assembled to handle the emergency. The company's crisis manager, Scarsdale, takes charge, launching efforts to locate the missing plane and ensure the safety of the passengers and crew. Back on the island, Brodie is cautious with Louis Gaspard, aware of his violent past, and makes sure he's separated from the rest of the passengers. Brodie, Deal, and Bonnie work to keep everyone calm, attempting to improvise a plan for calling for help. However, Deal warns Brodie that the island is controlled by violent separatist rebels, meaning they're in grave danger the longer they remain. Soon, the separatists, led by their ruthless leader Datu Junmar, become aware of the plane's crash landing and see the stranded passengers as potential hostages or bargaining chips. In a desperate bid for survival, Brodie decides to venture into the jungle with Louis to search for a way to call for help, hoping to avoid the rebels and get a message out before they're discovered. In New York City, Scarsdale and the Trailblazers board review Captain Brodie Torrance's history file, coming across a recorded incident where Brodie restrained an aggressive passenger by holding him in a chokehold until he passed out. The incident, triggered after the passenger punched Brodie during an attempted de-escalation, hints at Brodie's ability to manage high-stress situations. The team also tracks Brodie's recent calls, including one to Trailblazer Airlines and another to his daughter Daniela, which helps them pinpoint the plane's approximate location on Jolo Island. Realizing the severe risk posed by the island's separatist forces, and noting that the Philippine government is unable or unwilling to intervene, Scarsdale makes a decisive move. He hires a private mercenary team to execute a rescue operation for the stranded crew and passengers. Meanwhile, in Honolulu, Daniela's aunt receives the grim news of the crash and shares it with Daniela. Heartbroken and fearful for her father's safety, Brodie and Lewis make their way to a nearby communications tower, where Brodie manages to get a call through to an agent at Trailblazer Airlines. However, the agent, skeptical and overwhelmed by the influx of prank calls regarding the missing flight, dismisses Brodie's claims. Desperate, Brodie dials his daughter Daniela, attempting to tell her their location. But before he can share more information, a rebel ambushes him. A fierce struggle ensues, with Brodie ultimately managing to overpower and kill the attacker. Exploring the building further, Brodie and Louis make a chilling discovery. The area has been used by the rebels to torture and film hostages for ransom, with traces of blood and recording equipment littering the space. Horrified, they realize the brutal extent of the rebels' operations. In a rush, the two head back to the plane, only to find that Junmar and his armed rebels have already reached the crash site. As they watch from a distance, a terrified Korean woman tries to escape but is mercilessly shot. Her husband suffers an even grimmer fate, meeting a brutal execution at the hands of the rebels. The remaining passengers and crew are taken hostage by Junmar and his men, who begin leading them away, leaving one guard behind to watch for any other survivors. Once the coast is clear, Brodie and Louis stealthily approach the plane, where they manage to subdue the lone rebel left behind. They interrogate him and learn that Junmar is taking the hostages to a nearby village controlled by the separatists. Determined to save everyone, Brodie and Lewis agree to follow Junmar and mount a rescue, braving the dangers of the hostile island as they track the captors. As Brodie and Lewis make their way toward the village, they witness the rebels forcing the hostages to state their names and home countries on camera, preparing to record a ransom video. Meanwhile, the mercenary team led by Shellback arrives at the crash site, only to find the plane deserted. Surveying the area, they discover the bodies of the RCMP officer and the flight attendant, along with a written message from Brodie, giving Shellback an idea of the direction Brodie and the passengers have been taken. Brodie and Lewis reach the village under the cover of darkness. Stealthily navigating the area, they take down several rebel guards, narrowing in on the location of the hostages. After locating them, they spring into action, freeing the terrified passengers and ushering everyone onto a bus. Knowing the rebels won't give up easily, Brodie courageously offers himself as a decoy, hoping to buy the others enough time to escape. Junmar and his men capture Brodie, beating him severely as they prepare to execute him. Just as all hope seems lost, Shellback and the mercenary team arrive, launching an assault on the rebels. Gunfire erupts as the mercenaries engage Junmar's men, while Louis and the freed hostages fight to break through the chaos. With Louis' help and support from the mercenaries, Brodie manages to escape, rejoining the group as they make their way to safety. In the aftermath of the battle, Junmar finds his brother among the casualties. Grief-stricken and enraged, he becomes even more determined to pursue Brodie and the others, turning his vendetta into a deeply personal mission of vengeance. As the passengers and crew hastily make their way back to the damaged plane, Louis and the mercenary team stay behind, fending off the pursuing rebels in a fierce firefight. At Trailblazers HQ, Executive Terry Hampton insists that the plane remain grounded, fearing the disastrous consequences for the airline if the heavily damaged plane were to explode mid-flight. Crisis Manager Scarsdale, however, dismisses Hampton's concerns. Recognizing the immediate threat to everyone's lives, he urges Brodie to take off, emphasizing that escaping the island is their only chance of survival. Meanwhile, Louis comes across the ransom money the mercenaries brought, and he makes a decision. Rather than return to face a bleak future, he will remain on the island with the money, content with his choice. He wishes Brodie luck, knowing the passenger's fate now rests entirely in his hands. With the first wave of rebels mostly defeated, Brodie and Deal rush to get the plane moving. As they begin to taxi down the makeshift runway, Junmar appears, aiming an RPG at the aircraft. In a split-second decision, Brodie lifts the plane just high enough to bring the wheels crashing down on Junmar, killing him instantly. Though the plane sustains further damage, they press on, aiming for the nearest airstrip on Ciassi Island. With only one engine operational and minimal control, Brodie, supported by Dele's steady guidance, carefully navigates the perilous journey to Ciassi. Despite the overwhelming odds, Brodie manages a rough but safe landing on the island's small airstrip. Back at HQ, the Trailblazers team erupts into cheers, relieved that the passengers and crew have survived the ordeal. As everyone deboards and breathes a collective sigh of relief, Brodie takes a moment to sit on the plane's steps, exhausted, but grateful. Pulling out his phone, he dials Daniela's number, and with a steady voice, he reassures her that he's safe and will be coming home, fulfilling the promise he made to her before his fateful journey began.